Well, good evening and welcome to the Children of Bethlehem webinar by Pilgrims of Ibillin. We are grateful for your presence with us tonight. My name is Peter Henry, and I am the president of the board of directors for Pilgrims of Ibillin. Pilgrims of Ibillin began in 1995 at Grosse Pointe Memorial Church based on a friendship between Father Elias Shakur, founder of the Mar Elias Educational Institution, and then pastor of Grosse Pointe Memorial, Bruce Rigdon. And since 1995, friends in the United States and around the world have been supporting Pilgrims as a way of supporting Mar Elias in fostering peace and justice in Israel and Palestine through education. Our supporting ministries through the years have gone from being focused solely on Mar Elias to including peace partners who have similar missions in that region. And our work is primarily consisted of sending pilgrims to the Middle East, to Israel and Palestine on what we call our Living Stones pilgrimages, also through speaking engagements where Abuna is able to come to the United States, as well as bringing sometimes staff and students from Mar Elias. As you can imagine, our ways of connecting people to Mar Elias have changed a little bit during the pandemic to include things like these webinars, for which we are deeply grateful. Throughout the years, Pilgrims has raised several $1,000,000 in support of the educational goals of Mar Elias, and we are grateful for all of the support through the years. If you ever want to know more about the work of Pilgrims, you can certainly contact me as the president of the board, Peter Henry, and my email address is phenry@dcpc.org. But better yet, we're joined tonight by our executive director, Esria Shireen. And we also have Brenda Mijos, who is the chair of our program committee. And we've got several other directors, including James Thomas, an important member of our program committee, who's hosted several seminars for us in the past. Tonight, however, the most important person among us is Katie Archibald-Woodward, who is a photographer and a spiritual director and really so much more. Born and raised in Southern California, graduating from Willamette University in Oregon and then Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. She is someone whose formative travel experiences led to a growing desire to help connect people through visual and voiced storytelling. It led her to get a certificate in digital photography from Emory University, and then a certificate in spiritual companioning through the Shalem Institute. And she now focuses the majority of her energy on being a connector between the United States and Palestine and Israel through storytelling, speaking engagements like tonight, as well as her own pilgrimages. Her stated aim, according to her website, which we'll put in the chat at some point, is to help spread awareness about the daily life of our neighbors in Israel and Palestine, and to partner with them in their pursuit of freedom, equality, dignity, and peaceful coexistence. You can see why she feels like such a natural fit for partnering with Pilgrims of Ibillin. And Katie, we are deeply grateful that you are willing to share your gifts for storytelling, and most importantly, the stories of the children of Bethlehem in their life under occupation. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you. It is such a gift to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'd like to begin our time with a blessing. I'm going to offer this blessing before and after our time together. To the home of peace, to the field of love, to the land where forgiveness and right relationship meet, we look. With longing for Earth's children, with compassion for its creatures, with hearts breaking for the nations and people we love. May we be open to visions we have never known. May we be strengthened for self-givings we have never made. May we be delighted with a oneness we could never have imagined, that we may truly be makers of peace. So to give you a little backstory of how Children of Bethlehem came to be, I'd like to take you on a little journey over the last 11 years. My encounters with Israel and Palestine and interest in the region started in childhood with the stories of the Bible, but really took a deepened turn when I was studying abroad at Basel, this ecumenical institute for the World Council of Churches in Switzerland. And there I met another student, Ashraf, who was a Palestinian Christian. And during our time together, I didn't really learn a lot about the occupation or his life in Israel and Palestine, but it was a deep initial connection and friendship that influenced my decisions down the road, and connection with the region and the people living there today, and more of the situation. So 6 months after studying with Ashraf, I got to visit Israel and Palestine for the first time myself with a group of seminary students. And like many people, perhaps many even on this call, the trip was really focused on archaeology and the biblical sites. And I relished seeing all the beautiful places that really satisfied my imagination of what the land looked like 2,000 years ago. And really didn't pay much attention, nor was I encouraged to pay attention to the political situation or the people living there today. And I didn't really put that into question because it hadn't even been on my radar. Well, fast forward after seminary, and I started an interest in documentary photography. And I started to wonder how this might weave in with my call to ministry. And I had a mentor encourage me to just go and try it. And so I considered, what story would be really meaningful and important and enable me to really get a sense if this was work for me. And that's when the pieces started to come together around Israel and Palestine. And I had visited there again a few years after my seminary experience. And both experiences brought me enough awareness to know how little I knew about the realities on the ground. And that's when I realized if I were to go into being a leader in ministry and in the church, it seemed vitally important that I know the contemporary situation of the people living there. And it was something that I hadn't learned anything about in church really, or in seminary. And so that is where my first storytelling project took off, through the checkpoint. And so I spent about 6 months during 2 trips, one with Pilgrims of Ibillin, to visit and live with Palestinian Christians and Muslims and Jewish Israelis, and to be able to photograph them and hear their stories firsthand. What was life like amidst occupation? What was it like to experience colonialism firsthand as a Palestinian, or unequal rights in Israel, or being a Jewish Israeli and part of the colonial Zionist movement and project to inhabit the West Bank and all of Israel. And so I had an opportunity to hear a diversity of voices and then provide a platform for Americans to become more informed about the firsthand stories of Israel and Palestine today. During that trip in 2016 with the Pilgrims group, I was sitting out to the Dead Sea. I'd had enough of the salty water and was chatting with our tour guide. And I asked him how his family was. And he told me at that point that his 13-year-old son was struggling with depression. And it was such a surprise to me to even consider a child being depressed. And he shared with me that their house had been shelled by the Israeli military. They live in Bethlehem. And it was mistaken for somebody else's house. And that the gunfire had just created trauma for their kids. So to shift to after that trip and doing a number of exhibitions of Through the Checkpoint, I was noticing how people were responding to the content. And it seemed that people were really moved by the journalistic images and the direct stories. They were also quite overwhelmed, and people were hurt and saddened, but kind of struggling to be motivated to take some action, even though I provided a lot of materials. And that's when I started to wonder if there might be a more accessible way to educate Americans about Israel and Palestine. And that's when I remembered the story of our tour guide's son. And I remembered a child in Bethlehem and wondered if, especially if my audience were mainly American Christians, what would it be like to present them with stories of contemporary children living in Bethlehem, this place that they have a very nostalgic connection to, and are follow closely a child that was born there. And so that is how Children of Bethlehem came to be. And I had a couple of connections with Darul Kalima School in Bethlehem, and reached out to them about potentially partnering to see if perhaps there was a class of kids or a group of kids that might be interested in participating in a storytelling project like this. And they connected me with a man named Rami Khader, who at the time was the director of the DR Academy for Children and Youth, which is connected with the Darul Kalima School. And it offers all sorts of wonderful arts programs and theater. And so he is a wonderful creative and organizational mind. So he was my wonderful Palestinian counterpart and helped coordinate my connection with the seventh grade class of kids at Darul Kalima School. And I wanted to work with seventh graders because 12, 13-year-olds are going through a lot of changes. It's a really pivotal time when kids are kind of shifting from childhood to a little bit more maturity, a little bit more adulthood. And for Palestinian kids, it's a time where they are largely having to consider how they want to resist the occupation. Are they going to be involved in some nonviolent resistance? Are they going to participate in some kind of reactive violent resistance of some kind? What are their decisions in their minds at this age? And so, so I did, let's see here, how do I want to explain this? So I offered to the kids an opportunity to create self-portraits. And so they drew self-portraits, and I will begin the slide shown now just for a little sense of what these kind of looked like. Let me get my right screen here. Here we go. Yeah. So you can see the kids created self-portraits, which was an opportunity for them to have self-expression and also some identity protection if that were necessary. And through these self-portraits, they were invited to express on the right-hand side of the page images or words of their experience of today, their reality today living in Bethlehem. And then on the left-hand side, they were asked to draw and write their dreams and their hopes for their future. And in addition to this, I interviewed each of them, asking the same 4 questions with the hope by the answers of these questions that it would allow audiences to really get a sense of what it's like to live in Bethlehem today. And so they were asked for these 4 questions. Just tell me about your drawing. Why did you draw what you did? What is one thing you would want a friend living far away to know about life in Bethlehem? Like, what's one thing they would want us to know about living in Bethlehem? What is one of your fears? And what is one of your dreams? I'm going to exit out of this now. So now we're going to have an opportunity to hear these stories firsthand, and all my lovely assistants on the window, on the screen right now, are going to be the voices of the kids while I ask them the questions, and it'll allow you a sense of what it's like to live in Bethlehem today for a 12 and 13-year-old Palestinian child. So this is Javada. Javada, tell me about your drawing.
Are you going to share the drawing?
Oh, did it not share? I'm so sorry. I thought it screen shared already. My apologies. Okay. Here we go.
I drew my reality, which is that we are living in very difficult times because of the occupation and we cannot study easily. Also, we go to school with fear inside. Every one of us is worried anything could happen anytime. On the other side, I drew that I want to become a doctor and to live a happy life without any problems.
What is something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
I would say that we are living a very hard and difficult life, and we cannot study easily like other kids.
What's one of your fears?
School closes and not being able to study.
And what's one of your dreams?
One of my dreams is to live a happy life without problems.
Thank you. This is Bashara. Bashara, tell me about your drawing.
First of all, I drew this to show the grace of God. Like he created the trees and the sun for us. Also, I drew our house and I'm playing football with my friends in front of it. Also, these trees God created to show the beauty of the nature and they give us oxygen. That's it. In the second part, I drew my future, that I want to become a businessman and have my own company so I can care for the poor people and give them money and let them have a good life.
What's something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
Honestly, my uncle is living outside the country and he knows a little bit about Bethlehem, but he does not know that the occupation is trying every day to take our property, our houses. The Israelis try to kill children and they take them to the Israeli prisons. For example, the Israeli soldiers come every single day to our land in Nahalim and tell us, we will take your land. So every single day we resist them and we try to protect it.
What's one of your fears?
The occupation.
And what's one of your dreams?
My dreams that one day the occupation will go away and never come back so we can live in peace.
And this is Joyce. Joyce, tell me about your drawing.
I live through music, singing, and drawing, and I would like to live like this in the future. In the future, I wish to become a singer and to teach my kids how to sing or to play one of the instruments.
What's something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
He should know that we are living under occupation, and we cannot live like this all of our lives. We can live in happiness, not just in sadness.
What's one of your fears?
I'm afraid of not being able to live in happiness and peace. I'm afraid to continue our lives through sadness.
And what's one of your dreams?
To become a singer.
This is Ali. Tell me about your drawing, Ali.
I'm showing the Israeli occupation and the Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli occupation, how they victimize the Palestinians and the Palestinian prisoners. They are the heart of the Arab world. I want to be an engineer in the future.
What is something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
Life in Bethlehem is not easy, and it is bad because of the occupation, and they, the Israelis, victimize our people.
What is one of your fears?
One of my fears? Prisons. Prisons.
And what is one of your dreams?
To become an engineer.
I'd like to take a moment here to invite anybody to respond directly in the Q&A section right now with your responses with the children's portraits, and we will read those aloud after this time. The other note I'd like to make, I want to go back a couple of slides to Bashara. So Bashara, as some of you might be familiar with is a relative, one of the family members of the Tent of Nations. People who are involved in Israel and Palestine may have received an email that's been going around for about the last week from different organizations to acknowledge that the Tent of Nations, which is this farm in Nahalin that he mentions, is surrounded by 5 Israeli settlements. And they have been fighting for the right to stay on their land. And they have been in court after court after court for the last 20 years to keep their land. They have the paperwork and all the rights, but because they're in the middle of all these settlements, the settlements really want their land, and they do all sorts of things to destroy the land and uproot their trees, and have created all kinds of restrictions. And the Israeli government and the court systems are putting a hold on their permit, and they're at risk of losing their land. And so there will be some what you can do actions that I will offer at the end of our time. And one of those will be to sign a petition and also write your representatives or call your representatives to support and protect the land of Bashara's family. There we go. Oops. All right, we're on Kenzie now, I think, or did I miss somebody? Let's see here. Oh no, there we go, Kenzie. Kenzie, tell me about your drawing.
I drew Palestine under occupation, and we are very sad because of that. At this time, I really love to play football very much, and I like music a little bit. In this picture, I wish I can become a businesswoman, a very good swimmer, and I wish I can see Palestine free.
What is something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
That we are not just living under occupation, but we are living our lives even when we are under occupation.
What's one of your fears?
That Palestine will be destroyed.
And what's one of your dreams?
To become a businesswoman.
This is Muhammad. Muhammad, tell me about your drawing.
This picture expresses that we are living under the occupation and injustice. The occupation is not letting us do anything or whatever we want to do. It's taking everyone from us without them doing anything. This is the light, pointing to the yellow spot over his heart, that will release Palestine.
What is something you would tell a friend who lives far away about living in Bethlehem?
I will tell him that we live under occupation and we are fighting to protect it.
What's one of your fears?
For example, that the Israeli soldiers kill one of my family members.
And what's one of your dreams?
My dream is to see Palestine released from the occupation.
So I'll make one final comment on Muhammad's, and that another reason that it was important for me to work with 12 and 13-year-olds is that this is also an age where they are at increased high risk of being detained or arrested by the Israeli military. The military is known to arrest and detain children as young as 6, maybe younger, and for any or no reason at all. It could be that a child was in the wrong place at the wrong time when another child was throwing stones at a completely armored vehicle or armored soldier. And it's just a very horrible and traumatic experience. And I think we need to remember that no matter what reason or no reason was given for this child's detention, they are a child, and that's the injustice and the wrong. And so one of the other options that I want to share with you of what you can do will be, and I'll put these in the chat box, are to be writing your representatives as well about protecting the rights of Palestinian children. And there is a link to my website that has a link there to write your representatives about protection of the Palestinian children and their rights. Some other options for you are to go to my website, lifeilluminatedtravel.org, and the resources tab has a myriad of options for you and all kinds of content. If you are a video media person, if you prefer podcasts, if you prefer written content, articles, books, you'll find a ton there. You can also see the full exhibition of Children of Bethlehem with all 20 stories of the children. You can also find the Through the Checkpoint exhibition. And there are audio interviews and also some more full-length feature articles. I will also put in the chat box, as I mentioned, abilities to help save the Tent of Nations. There's a petition you can sign, and you can also call or write your representatives and senators. All the content is there for you, even a written script. So that would be really impactful. Our representatives and senators hear mostly from people who are supportive of Zionist movement and growth in Israel and Palestine, and not really much about justice and peace in Israel and Palestine. So they really need to hear our voices. Other options are to partner with Pilgrims of Ibillin, partner with DR Academy, partner with Dar al-Kalima, and to go and see. Pilgrims of Ibillin offers wonderful trips. I have attended them and I have co-led one. And you hear from a myriad of wonderful people across the board, people who are living in Palestine and Israel, and Palestinian Christians and Muslims and Jewish Israelis, and people who are working for peace and justice there, and really giving you an opportunity to hear from a variety of people and have your own discernment about where your heart is leading you to act and beliefs to cultivate. I also lead customized pilgrimages for smaller groups of people, and I'll put those links as well in the chat box. We are about to switch to Q&A here, and as I put those things in the chat box, I'm going to pass the baton to Peter.
Thank you, Katie. We'll give Katie a moment to give us a few of those links, and appreciate Katie reminding folks that we lead pilgrimages through Pilgrims of Ibillin. And I know by looking at some of the names of participants that several of you have been on some of those trips. And Katie, I think one of the questions that's going to come to you in a couple of moments is to be willing to share a little bit more about the trips that you take. There are a variety of ways to experience Palestine and Israel, and different trips might connect with different people differently. In the meantime, I do want to make sure folks know that even as I said that we've raised millions of dollars for Mar Elias through the years, it's also the case that since about 2008, Pilgrims of Ibillin has included a few peace partners in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Israel, who are seeking a just peace as we are. And we have been able to share of the resources of our friends and their funds with some of those peace partners. And it just so happens that one of them is the Dayar Consortium, which, as Katie said, is part of Dar Kalima. And Dayar, according to their own website, is the plural of Dar, and it means home or homeland in Arabic. It's Lutheran-based, it's ecumenically oriented, it's trying to serve the whole Palestinian community with an emphasis on children, youth, women, and the elderly. And they've got a variety of unique programs. And interestingly enough, one of the programs that we have been putting our funding into through the years is their women's soccer team, which has been among the most successful of women's soccer teams among Palestinians and in Palestine and Israel. And so if you were to ever feel inclined to be supportive of the Children of Bethlehem, there is no doubt that we can be a way for you to get money to Dayar Consortium. It's also true that we'd like to think that we bless the Children of Bethlehem through our support of the WEAM Palestinian Conflict Resolution Center. But specifically tonight, if you were to be led to make a gift on behalf of the children, we would make sure that would go to the Dayar Consortium in their work on behalf of children. So thank you for letting me put that in there, Katie.
So now I think, do we want to, I have a couple more resources. I'm slowly putting in all the links for Pilgrims of Ibillin. Just give me a few more moments.
Well, while you're doing that, I just want to share the comments that people put into the Q&A. So Russ says, very powerful. can't help but be moved by children's emotions. Which is so true. And thank you for bringing these poignant stories of these children to us from Becky. And Richard says, as someone who taught 12, 13, and 14-year-olds, I know these young people to be full of life and hopes and anxiety. They look forward, yet with the changes that they experience at this age, even in the best circumstances, they're uncertain, somewhat anxious, and aware of the stresses around them. They're at a turning point in their lives, and they are the future of Palestine, indeed, and the people who can change their world. So please find ways to support them. And indeed, I concur completely.
Well, I'll give a moment for people to write any questions that you might have in the Q&A section. But first, I will conclude with our blessing again and hope that it might help hold the space of this time and the things that it has sparked in your heart and guide you into action and response in courageous ways. To the home of peace, to the field of love, to the land where forgiveness and right relationship meet, we look, O God, with longing for earth's children, with compassion for the creatures, with hearts breaking for the nations and people we love. Open us to visions we have never known. Strengthen us for givings we have never made. Delight us with a oneness we could never have imagined, that we may truly be born makers of peace. Put the book in the chat box as well, where that prayer came from. It's one that I'll make a little plug for this book. I use this book, Praying with the Earth, a prayer book for peace, often at home, but always when I am traveling in Israel and Palestine, because it offers prayers and reflections and scripture from Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders. And it's a wonderful collection of prayers and helps me for sure be grounded and be in a really helpful heart space when I'm in Israel and Palestine.
Katie, I know that Esria has a couple of questions that have been sent to her, and so I don't know if she might want to start off with those.
Yeah, I can do that. So I have a few questions collected. Daryl asks, what did you expect to learn or experience before you made your trips? And then what did you actually learn?
Oh, thank you for that question. Well, my initial 2 trips, I really expected just to connect with the land in a biblical mindset. I was hoping to connect more spiritually with God and a sense of my call and ministry and just the wonder and beauty of being in the land where Jesus had walked and lived. When I started my more in-depth visits to Israel and Palestine, starting in 2016 and then through 2019, I expected to learn, to be awakened, I think would be an appropriate word to use. I did 2 trips, one with Pilgrims of Ibillin, and that was an opportunity I really wanted to get to know more of the Palestinian Christians. And then I also did a trip with what was at the time the Interfaith Peace Builders group, but it's now Eyewitness Palestine. And they offer delegations that always have a theme. And the theme that I was a part of was child detention. So I was expecting and actually did learn quite a lot about what the experiences are like, the very traumatic experiences of youth being detained, the things that I didn't expect or even have awareness to expect were just the the challenges and ridiculousness of the justice system. I didn't know that Palestinians living in the West Bank and Jewish Israeli settlers living in settlements that are in the West Bank but are considered Israel by the Israeli government, they live under two different systems of law. That Palestinians live under military law, and a few miles away in the settlements, the Israelis live under civilian law. So they have an entirely different set of rights and options when they are taken to court for anything. I also didn't know that a child being detained was different than a child being arrested. A child being detained enables they're under like military control, and there is no set time for which they are arrested. They can just be detained for an indefinite amount of time. And so these kids are left in these tiny stalls, often in isolation, which for adults, being isolated for up to 3 days is considered traumatic, and these kids can be left in there for weeks. Kids left. So yeah, it was just really shocking, and that most of the kids are detained on secret evidence that is never revealed. So it's really hard to even argue or enable or like get a child out of the detention system. It's usually a couple of years is what it averages. And then people have to spend their life's work helping kids recover from this trauma, which Rami, who was my partner through DR, is now the director of the rehabilitation center through the YMCA, and it's rehab for kids who have come out of detention and prison. And they're doing some really great and innovative work. But you know, the whole point really of detaining and arresting the kids is to derail them, really, to break down the system of structure and stability among the Palestinians. And it's all, you know, it all comes back to land, acquiring more land. And so any ways in which the Palestinian system can be broken down and motivating people either to be acquiescent to the laws and the control of the Israeli military, or to be motivated to move, all of those things enable the state of Israel to acquire more of the land and have fewer and fewer Palestinians there. Yeah, that was a long answer, but it's something I get pretty passionate about.
Yeah, for good reason. Thank you. There was a request. Can you show the prayer book one more time?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Yeah, and I put it in the chat box as well.
Okay.
You can if people can take a screenshot of that, but I can put it in the chat again. Is that good?
That's good. And we'll also share it in an email in the coming days with everybody who is here with us tonight. Okay, so another question for you is, dear Katie, thank you for your continuing in-depth advocacy for justice for Palestinians through art and photography, and your insightful commentary that is factual and personal. You are in my heart and prayers. Well, that's from Karen Burns. So not a question, but thought we'd share that with you. And so I do have a couple other questions that have come in. Have you had any follow-up with the children from this project? And do you have any updates from them, you know, the time when you know they did draw and share their pictures and their dreams and their fears? And have there been any changes in their lives that you know of that you can report?
Yes, so I was so delighted that in 2019 in the fall, so I created and documented the stories of the kids in 2018, in the fall of 2018. And then in 2019, we got to do the exhibition at the DR Center. And so that was such a joy that children and parents got to be there. And it was, I think that the greatest delight was seeing the kids look at and point out people that they knew and see their stories. I also noticed because of their age, a few of them were quite embarrassed and didn't really, like the kids who had been involved, very few of them were really engaged in the art. But if there were 4 girls that I took a photo with, and I didn't get to talk to them very much, but there were a couple of them who were really touched by the art, and it was empowering for them to see themselves in that way and expressed in that way. So the handful that could were able to kind of wrap their minds around it. I think it was really meaningful.
Nice. Thank you. Do you happen to know of any projects that allow youth to use cell phone technology to be visual storytellers of their experience?
That is something I've been working with a group that's educating about Christian Zionism, and one of the ideas that was thrown out was to have people video their own experiences of Zionist movement in Palestine. We didn't actually end up doing that, but I think Bethlehem Bible College might be doing something related to that. I don't know of any specific projects, but I've definitely heard people talking about wanting to do things like that. I'd say the best way to get experiences like that at this point is to be on Instagram, because I think a lot of people are doing videos and images of their life there and posting them there.
Thank you. Just a couple comments I wanted to share. Anne says, thank you so much for this presentation. Children lead us as ever and always. And Julia says, thank you for this thoughtful and informative, emotionally moving slide presentation, and pray that occupation will end peacefully. Another question, is Bethlehem still videotaping, I guess, video recording? And I'm not sure exactly what that was referring to, but do you happen to know?
I think they have put out new content this year. I vaguely remember there might be somebody else who's listening into this webinar that might have the answer to that. And if you do, please put it in the Q&A section. I will put the link to Bethlehem in the chat box just so people have a sense of who they are. They offer incredible resources and education and videos. The other really great person to get video content from is the Palestinian activist Issa Amro on Instagram. If you're there, I think he reposts everything to Facebook as well, but I will put his name in. He and youth, what's it called? There's a group in Hebron of youth that also do activism and some video content. So my brain's starting to click in and remember some of these things. I'll try to remember their names and put those in there in the chat. Youth Against Settlements. Yes. Oh, there we go, Andrew. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your trips that you lead? Is there a photography component, or how would you describe them?
Well, that's the fun of them, actually. I have quite a few models of options. So things that would be focused on culinary, or focused on photography, or focused in various areas. Just kind of depends on what people are interested in. The joy of having gone quite a lot over the last few years is just all of the contacts and connections. And so my hope is that I can craft with people the trips that they'd like to take. So some that might be more spiritually focused, or interfaith, different things like that. Ones that are focused totally on homestays, others that include hotels or different quality of hotel. So anything really that people are interested in. And I think like ideally the group is, anywhere from 2 to 8, 2 to 12 people max, because that allows us to be in a smaller van and you have a lot more accessibility to all kinds of things when you're a smaller group of people. It's fine to do large groups. I've been a part of them as well, but I find that you just have more options as a small group.
Katie, for folks who maybe didn't see the very first slide of our slideshow at the beginning, I think most everybody had a chance to see some of the slideshow, and maybe at the end when we conclude, I'll start that up again. And if people want to see it again after having heard you and your storytelling, they can take it in perhaps even a little bit differently and a little more deeply. But for folks who didn't see the first slide, obviously we gave credit to you for the pictures. And I want folks, if they watch it again, to notice one of the last pictures when we talk about children in Bethlehem. One of the last pictures comes from the playground of the WIAM Palestinian Conflict Resolution Center, literally at the base of the wall. That was probably one of the most, that's one of the most lasting impressions on me on our trip, was seeing where children play at the base of that wall. But folks who didn't see the beginning slide might not have seen the name of our singer and what her connection is. Will you remind folks who made that beautiful gift of music that we put together with your pictures?
Yes, there are wonderful, all kinds of wonderful connections with the WIAM Center. So the young girl who is singing is Layar Nicola, or Zugbi, and I think she's Layar Nicola. And she is connected with the Zugbi family that started the WIAM Conflict Resolution Center. And her father is Usama, who is the guide for most Pilgrims of Ibillin trips, and also the guide that I work with. And every time I go to Bethlehem, I stay with their family in their guest houses. And Usama's mother and Layar's grandmother is also this phenomenal cook. She's taught me all kinds of things about Palestinian cooking and how to cook in general. And so she would do cooking classes for people who are interested in my trips. And also there are options for olive picking, and there olive groves, depending on the time of year that you're there. But that family is a group, is a Palestinian Christian family that lives about 3 minutes walking distance from where Jesus was born, which is kind of wondrous. And their family's been there for centuries. They have names in the books in church, in one of the churches there for, I don't even know how many centuries, but they are deeply rooted there. So yeah, they're a wonderful group of people, and they run the WIAM Center. And the other thing you may or may not have seen in the picture, and I think we'll show it again, or maybe it was a different picture I had, but on top of that wall at the WIAM Center is something that looks like a gun next to a tower, a military tower, and it's actually a skunk water gun. And Usama has told me multiple stories where kids are playing on the playground, or they're having a party, or they're having an event, and they just spray it down with skunk water, and the whole place reeks for days, and these poor kids are exposed to this like awful sewage. It's terrible. So if you can imagine playing on the playground with that thought lingering in your mind, it's possible, that the military is watching you, or that skunk water will spray you that day. It's important that we think about what's going on in the back of these children's minds, and has been for the last 4 generations that have lived under these conditions. How does that shape a society? Do we have any more questions?
It sounds like we may be at a good point, Katie. And we'll give people just a little space if there is one more. I do want to say, while we wait to see if there's one more, thank you. I think for all of us who love children, for those of us who've had a chance to take a trip, we remember seeing them, and we've even noticed a few of their stories, but those words and their pictures, and to have you share those based out of your experiences in traveling, thank you for that. It draws us a little closer and reminds us, even as I said to some friends online, we're celebrating a few more freedoms for our children on the other side of the pandemic, not totally, but some more. But there are children who are yearning for a different kind of freedom that they don't get just yet. Looks like Brenda, before I offer a final word of thanks, Katie, Brenda wanted to ask about the Defense for the Children.
Oh, yes, Defense for Children International. So Defense for Children in Palestine is one of the groups that largely works with the protection of children and children's rights in Palestine. And their counterpart, Defense for Children International, is has a lot of resources as well. And Brenda, I might defer to you if there's something else that you wanted to share, because I feel like I don't quite have the best spiel on them.
I guess it takes me to, there has been some movement there. Betty McCollum in Minnesota has sponsored a bill trying to bring attention and stop funding for Israel if children are harmed in this way. Do you know? I actually don't know where we're at with that. Do you know more than I do?
I have the co-sponsors, and I just put the link in the
okay. Thank you.
Box. But I'm not sure it's something that we are able to write our representatives about yet. And maybe somebody else can put that in the chat as well. There used to be a link through Defense for Children International to the bills that Betty McCollum had been working on over the last few years, but they've kind of switched dynamics. But I think I'll put the Defense for Children content in the chat box too, because they have a very important movement in the US called No Way to Treat a Child campaign. And that's another really powerful way that you can get involved, an important way you can get involved in the protection of Palestinian children.
Katie, there was one question that I'm going to let Brenda answer. When somebody did want to note that if anybody on this call happens to live in Michigan, Father Shakur is on a family trip to South Bend, Indiana. But while he was here, we arranged for one talk and he arranged for a couple of visits to some supporter churches. He was in Holland, Michigan last night. He's actually in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, perhaps speaking as we are talking at the Grosse Pointe Memorial Church. And then he's going to be in Kalamazoo, Michigan at Bronson Park, if anyone on the call tonight is from Michigan. But he's arranged most of those trips, which is why you didn't hear about it much from Pilgrims. These were all pretty quickly planned at the last minute based on this personal trip. Brenda, someone asked whether or not we have any pilgrimages coming up on behalf of Pilgrims of Ibillin. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, we do. We have one for the first 2 weeks of March next year. And I just received some more of a finalized itinerary from Usama Nicola at WIAM, who will be our guide there, and pricing. So I'm really close, but it's been a tough time because no one's been traveling. So they that's what's held it up. But there will be a pilgrimage. We will be visiting a lot of our peace partners, and James Thomas, who's been sitting in this call as a panelist. He was unable to be a panelist, but he's still showing up. Hi, James. He's going to be the instructor on the pilgrimage, and I'm really excited about that. He's on our board.
And Katie, maybe we'll let you take one last question, then I'll close with a word of thanks to folks. Someone did ask, and they asked about specifically how do evangelical Christians respond to your talks, and maybe you might also want to think about it more broadly. What are the kind of connections that are made with various groups through the work that you present?
Yes, thank you. That's such a great question. And before I answer that, I will say the last thing I put in the chat box was a link through Jewish Voice for Peace for how you can write your representative to support the Palestinian Children's Family Act, which is what we were talking about that Betty McCollum has put forth. So please click on that. Yes, I think the experience of evangelicals has been largely what my initial response was, even though I didn't necessarily grow up in the most evangelical background, but there's always this surprise of like, it's that bad. And then also a lot of confusion of but what to do with this line we've heard for so long of like, we have to support Israel. Like I care about these. I did a presentation at a church once, and a woman came up to me and thanked me so much for telling her and teaching her about the children in Bethlehem. And then she said, but of course I fully support Israel. And it was like, what is this? I think what needs to happen is this kind of gentle untangling and clarification of to support equal rights and equity of Palestinians, and to end the military occupation is not something that's anti-Israeli or anti-Israel or anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic. It is disengaged from that. And also inviting, what is it that Jesus is calling us to in loving our neighbors as ourselves? What does it mean to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God, and offer a fuller picture? Because most of the time, evangelicals especially have only heard the Jewish side of anything related to Israel and Palestine, and really only associate Israel with Jewish people. And there isn't even really a thought about Christians who live there, or the Muslims who live there, or if they are a thought, it's in the framework of a terrorist group. So a lot of the time working with evangelicals, it's helping clarify a lot of those questions, because there is a lot of confusion. They've only really heard one narrative most of the time. I'd only really heard one narrative, and didn't even question it. So I think what's really important to me, and has been really effective, especially working and offering Children of Bethlehem as an exhibition and an entry point into Israel and Palestine, is that it's not just what we say, it's how we say it. And we need to recognize that a lot of the American Christians in the United States have only heard a single narrative about Israel and Palestine. And that is deeply rooted with their spirituality and their faith, which is really sacred to them, to us. And so it's something that needs to be met with compassion, not just, lots of like bombardment of images and hard stories and reality in your face. Because I think even though I wasn't trying to go that route with Through the Checkpoint, it kind of came off that way to some people, and that they need a softer entry point, because there's a lot of emotion around this area and this subject. But that way, that path of compassion and love is Jesus's way. And it's a really effective way. All of us have an easier time receiving things when somebody listening to our hearts and creating space for us to express our questions vulnerably, and feel like we're heard rather than attacked or told we're wrong or judged or shamed. So I find that Children of Bethlehem has proved to be a really helpful way to invite Christians, especially, to learn more about the fuller picture of Israel, Palestine, and to partner with the people living there for their peace and their equity and harmonious coexistence.
Well, Katie, I imagine for some of us tonight, maybe not too self-righteously feel like we know some of these alternative narratives or the fuller narrative, but certainly what you've done is galvanized for some of us who feel like we've heard that narrative, and we thank you. But more importantly, you let us hear the narrative of children and to see their story. And we are deeply grateful for you tonight, both what you shared in terms of visuals and preparation, as well as the way you answered the questions tonight. And I know folks are going to be looking forward to the hopefully not too long email we're going to be sending, but it's going to have a lot of great links and resources. So we want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. And if folks have, and if they weren't on earlier and they have that extra 2 minutes and 51 seconds, we'll share my screen and we'll provide you one more time with the music by Lear Zugby and with the pictures by Katie. But again, Katie, thank you for tonight.
Thank you so much. It was such a blessing.
Here we go.
موطني موطني